Hello. The second chapter of the book Psychology as the Science of Human Being is written by Benetka and Joerchel, and it is titled Psychology as a Phenomenological Science. If you're not familiar with the term phenomenology, a useful alternative would be to simply think of it as open-minded or open-ended, which would make the chapter Psychology as an open-minded science or as an open-ended science. What makes this chapter special is that the authors have included discussions of three historical points when the phenomenological method emerges on the scene, either within a philosophical historical thread or within psychology. And an additional 3 points where the application of phenomenology becomes relevant, expressed in psychology. So we have a total of 6 historical moments discussed in this chapter, but there is a common thread having to do with the relevance and importance of phenomenology in psychology. Before I get to that, I'd like to thank you if you watched and shared the previous video, which was the first in the series, specifically people I know who have done so. I'd like to thank Giuseppina Marsico, Nandita Chaudhary, and Tobias Lindstad. And thank you for those new viewers who have joined me in this channel, with this project. And feel free to participate in any way that feels comfortable, leaving comments, making your own videos. But if you like to just sit back and enjoy watching the videos, that's also great. Let's turn to the chapter. As I said, we have 6 historical moments. The first 3 are more important in terms of their emphasis on the method of phenomenology. And first one of these 3 is the transition from Brentano to Husserl, Franz Brentano to Edmund Husserl, which reintroduces these two together, reintroduced, and showed the importance and application of the concept intentionality, which means that it's the idea that every mental act, every psychological act has an object. Every psychological act, psychological activity is directed towards something in the world. Or something. It might not be literally something that exists in the world, but it could be an idea. But it is directed at something. So the unit of analysis, what we should pay attention to when we are investigating mental activity, the unit of analysis should be agent-environment relationship together, not reducing it to one of those parts, not just the agent, not just the environment. Moreover, there was the introduction of epoche, reintroduction or rediscovery of epoche, bracketing out, which aims to move past existing judgments, existing prejudices. And these prejudices can vary. They can grow out of our desire to be very objective, disregarding the subjectivity, or the desire to be very subjective, disregarding the object and the relationship between subject and object. I want to here introduce my own example. It's an example of a mistake, and I think it would help in our understanding of the chapter, the themes in the chapter. So let's imagine this simple scenario. We have a researcher who is asking a person to fill in a questionnaire. So researcher, person, and the request of please fill in this questionnaire. Now, we have this situation and we can manipulate it experimentally with an experimental design and question whether there are relationships, systematic relationships between different parts of the situation. For example, we can ask about the loudness of the voice of the person who's requesting the filling of the questionnaire and how fast people fill in the questionnaire. So, is there a relationship between how fast fast the person fills in the questionnaire and how loudly the request is delivered? And when we ask these questions, we might get so confident that loudness is just loudness and nothing else. And so we would vary loudness of voice from level 1 to 10 and then measure how fast people fill in the questionnaire. But this is a mistake. It is a big mistake, and it is unfortunately a common mistake, because in this case, it is very plausible that after some level, say level 6 or 7, loudness begins to acquire other meanings, like it becomes perceived as rude or impatient. Somebody is talking with you very loudly. You don't just say, oh, this person is talking loudly, but that, oh, how rude of this person, or this person seems to be very impatient. And it is only by considering the entire subject-object relationship, by bracketing out, by letting go of our first hypothesis, by our first research question, that we can let the phenomenon reveal itself to us, like the possibility that this person appears rude or impatient. And epoche, bracketing out suspension of our prejudices, enables moving past our initial biases and seeing the phenomena. That was the first point in history, the Brentano-Husserl moment. Second is Max Wertheimer and Gestalt Psychology. Now, the example I just talked about might seem contrived to think of the relationship between loudness of voice and how fast people follow instructions. But we can describe the origin of Gestalt Psychology in a similar way. When Max Wertheimer introduced the forms of apparent motion, so 5 phenomena, which couldn't be described in terms of physical characteristics of the stimuli. If, for example, we just think about these are 2 lights, these are 2 points of lights, and we can vary the delay between their moments of onset, between the time this light turns on and the time that the next light turns on. And we are just varying quantitatively the delay between these 2 onsets. But we stumble upon some other meaning that emerges as a result of a particular period of delay. And that is the additional meaning, the additional quality, or the additional organization that suddenly arises out of these two dots, these 2 points of light, is apparent motion, which wasn't there before. And it wasn't there in our physical description of the stimuli. So Gestalt Psychology also has to do with being open to how phenomena might emerge, new meaning might emerge as a result of simple manipulation or simple explorations of physical stimuli. But it takes being open to observation to detect those new meanings, new types of qualities. The third historical moment is the Würzburg School, a group of students initially studying with Wilhelm Wundt, who questioned the assumptions that mind cannot observe itself. So there was, beginning with Kant, there was this idea that psychology is not possible as a rigorous science because the mind cannot observe itself. If you observe your mental processes, by observing them, you change them. But the Würzburg School's researchers in that group, they tried methods of introspection. They applied introspection to thought, to thinking, problem solving. Noticing that when something goes through my mind, it remains accessible for a time to introspection. So these are the first 3 historical moments: Husserl, Würzburg School, and Gestalt Psychology. You can read more about them if you go to the chapter. Now, next are 3 examples of phenomenology in action. First is Kurt Lewin. And Kurt Lewin did a study. It seems very informal because he did it as a soldier during war. And these are studies of the war landscape. And he did phenomenology of battlefields, including descriptions of how approaching the front line changes the sense of space. It is very important, a very important point here to emphasize is that this experience of approaching the front line and seeing the space, the perception of space transforming. This experience is not just, we don't see it as a change in our own state of mind. We see it instead as a change in the environment. The environment is transformed. A similar experience, which I hope you have not experienced and you will never experience, is if you lose your wallet, especially in a foreign environment, when you don't have any friends and you don't have any support, social support, and you suddenly don't have wallets, you don't have any money, you don't have any way of contacting anybody else, suddenly it's not just that you worry, your state of mind changes. Suddenly the place in which you are, that place begins to seem unfriendly and begins to seem like a foreign place, an unfriendly place. After Kurt Lewin, we have Martha Mucho, who was a child psychologist and similarly aimed to discover children's relationship with their environment, the children's living space, the way in which a child inhabits an environment, not through the perspective of an objective investigator that separates the child from the child's environment, but in a manner that includes and empathizes with the child's way of being in his or her space. This allows for detecting each child's unique living space. So you can think about an example of siblings. You can have multiple siblings. Apparently, they inhabit the same house, they live in the same place, but their living space, their psychological living space, can be totally different. Third and finally, we have Gustav Ichheiser. And here I should mention that the authors of this chapter have a volume, they have edited together a book called Memories of Gustav Ichheiser, which was published in 2018, 2 years after the publication of this Yokohama Manifesto. Ichheiser, his work, quite interesting. He, among other things, paid attention to impressions of other people. So first impressions, second impressions, and so on. Inspecting the development, how our impressions of somebody can change. Inspecting the development or evolution of his impression of another person. The example that is included in the chapter is an example of an author that he found and read his book first. He was very impressed by his book, and then he got to meet him. And he took note of his experience. He took note of how his perception changed over time. And for example, he was very disappointed with the author's furniture when he saw his home, which he said, oh, his book is so great, so interesting, but the furniture in his house is so old-fashioned and in poor taste. In short, now to close this presentation, in short, phenomenology is at the heart of psychology, as these 6 examples show. And any neglect of phenomenology can be at best local. It can generate local success for a very specific project of research. It can be a neglect of phenomenology can be temporary or for the sake of regional domain of study, where certain stabilities of subject-environment relation can be presupposed. You can presuppose that in this case, for example, in a psychophysical experiment, that the brightness is only brightness. And so we can vary this part of the situation and be confident that it doesn't acquire new meanings, and just look at the other side, other part, and see how these variables are correlated with each other. This, to put it bluntly, involves a closed-mindedness. So we close our minds to new phenomena, new meaning that might emerge as a result of our investigation, that we might confront as a result of exploration of a situation. So it involves a closed-mindedness that might have some practical advantage. Otherwise, in general, an appreciation of human reality leads very naturally to some form of phenomenological sensibility that is attentive to individual development, relationships between individuals and other people, and the surrounding culture context. That's it for now. Thank you for your attention, and I will continue in the next video with a discussion of Chapter 3.